Walter Smith was sat in his office bristling at the meeting he was just about to have. It was early in the September of 1994, just days after the infamous week from hell where his side had failed to qualify for the Champions League, had lost to Celtic at Ibrox and were eliminated from the League Cup, a trophy they had almost exclusive rights to by Falkirk. Now Smith had to summon his star signing back from his home country for crisis talks. 2 months earlier, down the corridor in the Blue Room, David Murray sparkled as he introduced him to the Scottish media. There had been more expensive signings, certainly, one at nearly double the price the year before, but in the chairman's opinion, none as good. This was, in his words, the biggest. He was going to be the difference in Europe for a Rangers side who couldn't afford to miss out on the elite again. The Fourth Estate were in no doubt that this was the most exciting signing in Scottish football for a number of years, and the front page of first editions of the fanzines bore his picture. The player himself seemed to agree. He could have gone elsewhere, Genoa, Tottenham or Arsenal, but he chose Glasgow not because he liked the town, in his words, but because he wanted to play at the highest level, and that is the European Cup. In order to be successful at that level, he said, you need skill, experience, good tactics and good players, but the Rangers were capable of it. Ironic then that so soon after arriving, he would be telling a very different story to the press. Or did he? That's what Smith sought to get straight. Describing Smith's tactics as crazy, he also lambasted his new colleague's attitude before the crucial tie with AEK Athens as all wrong by saying you just cannot go about winning such an important game when you're having a laugh in the dressing room half an hour before the kick-off. It was a major embarrassment for Smith when he needed it least, but apparently it was all lost in translation, not for the first time with a new Rangers foreign signing, and all just a big misunderstanding. Ultimately, though, it never worked out, and for the second season in a row, the marquee signing was a disaster who didn't fit in. Fortunately, however, there was another, and although he arrived with slightly less fanfare, he would go on to become a Rangers legend. Season 1994-95 shared many of the characteristics of the season that had just gone. Injuries, players forced to play out of position, cup disappointment at home and abroad, but it had one shining light. It was a story set under grey Scottish skies in the foreground and the brightness of a very enjoyable and entertaining World Cup in the back. It was a year where the subject of entertainment and individual flair dominated conversation. One where the Rangers support worshipped the birth of a new god and mourned the loss of an old one. We're here to talk about 94-95. I'm joined by Mr. Andy McGowan. How are we, Andy?
I'm great, Martyn. Sounds like an exciting episode ahead.
Exciting is certainly one word. Interesting it certainly will be. And very appropriately for this episode from Athens, it's Mr. John Cowden. How are we, John?
Yeah, I don't think I would ever describe what's about to come as great. Certainly not in the field, but yes, let's get this done.
Well, that's the spirit. For those listening in the future, we are recording in an official and formal period of mourning for the death of Her Majesty the Queen. I don't know if you'd know any different, given the subject matter that we're about to tell. One of, if not the most, difficult period of 2 or 3 months in Walter Smith's time as manager, certainly in his first spell. And yeah, we'll get through it all. Let's talk about the signings then. And given what he would go on to do, it's a wee bit jarring to think of Brian Laudrup being kind of secondary on that kind of summer bill. It should have jarred at the time more. He was a European champion with both club and country. He was voted the 4th best player in the world by World Soccer just 18 months before. If we'd signed that kind of pedigree now in 2022, I think the crowds would be from Edmondson Drive all the way down to Paisley. But maybe some reasons, Andy, to explain that relative subdued reception. Firstly, we expected it. Rangers fans expected big signings by now every year, so, yep, sure, that kind of fits the bill, big deal. Secondly, the first Laudrup to Rangers speculation was about his older and more distinguished brother Michael. Just in the week after the Scottish Cup final, it was known that he was leaving Barcelona, and I think the Herald said that Rangers were a certainty to be one of the clubs who had made a bid. He would, of course, sensationally go to Real Madrid. And possibly, thirdly, there was a feeling that his career was at a crossroads. By his own admission, his career was at a crossroads. He had officially won a Champions League medal with Milan. He'd gone to Sampdoria after the Euros '92. Fiorentina Fiorentina had been relegated that season. He went on loan to AC Milan for 93-94. I think he played 7 of the Champions League games, which qualified him for a medal. Wasn't used in the final because of the foreigner rule, but he hated Italy. It frightened him, his own words, and he felt stifled by that kind of tactical rigidity. So maybe there was a sense that, well, this guy's kind of failed there. The parlance of social media at the time, I'm sure, would have been, Serie A reject. Does that explain why Laudrup instead of Boli was the maybe second signing of interest that summer?
I mean, your recollections there, Martyn, are exactly the same as mine. I can vividly remember being on my supporters bus or waiting to get on it, and we're talking about the speculation. And Laudrup, I wouldn't say it was an afterthought, but it was kind of like, we're signing a winger. That's good, we're signing a winger. Christ, we're signing a winger, all right. We're signing much more than a winger. But it was a kind of nonchalant ignorance to maybe our support, but maybe Scottish football in general, because, as you say, we knew about Italian football. It was beamed into our rooms every Sunday. But I don't think we realised the kind of player he was, because we also knew him for the 92 European Championships and the miracle of Denmark, and he was obviously an integral player there. So when you look back, it is quite a strange thing that we didn't realise what a diamond we were getting. But I do think it had a lot to do with the fact that Boli was by far a more visible and high-profile name, given the Marseille escapades, given the fact that he was a France centre half. He was well known to British audiences with his, headbutting Stuart Pearce and stuff like that. So he was a bigger name than Laudrup, and I think the expectations were bigger on Boli than they were on Laudrup. So quite staggering.
I always felt that I got his signature before Rangers did, but that's not true. I think he'd signed, then gone home, and then come back over to effectively, start pre-season, just as I, with my family, were flying out to Florida for holiday at the old terminal. It was the new Terminal 2 then. It's just basically the kind of, I wouldn't say ramshackle hut, but it's where the COVID testing is now at Glasgow Airport. And we were waiting to queue up to check in, and my dad was looking out the windows. He thought he saw John Gregg kicking about, and of course he did see John Gregg kicking about, and Laudrup. So I get my boarding pass, or my whatever ticket I had, signed by Laudrup still somewhere. John, can you remember what you made of him? Even the players took a while. I spoke to David Robertson on the network years ago, and he said, like, they were playing Airdrie maybe in one of the first pre-season friendlies, come in at half-time and thought, this guy isn't as good as they make out. And it turned out that we weren't as good as he was, and we had to catch up to him. He was making passes that I simply wasn't reading, but as time went on, I knew that if I got the ball to Laudrup, I could make a run, and 9 times out of 10 he would find the pass to me. He made their life so much easier.
Yeah, I think the Italian football on the Sunday afternoon, but also was the Saturday morning with James Richardson still going.
Yeah.
And to be fair, Fiorentina get relegated, and then Milan didn't get too many games because they also had the 3 foreigner rule, did they not, domestically to a degree. So, I mean, we were watching Italian football, but he wasn't actually coming through. Yeah, whereas you would see all these other players, your Viallis, I think, would be kicking about. I'm trying to think all the, Sam would be doing it, etc. So you were watching it every week, but you actually weren't seeing him, which is, therefore, when you say you're signing him, you're thinking, we're getting a sub.
Mm-hmm.
And there is also, you think that you're getting his big brother, and it's one of those, well, it almost feels like, well, I can't go, but I'll send along my wee brother if that's okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm trivialising it, but there was that whole, and actually even the way he spoke, pretty much his whole time through is. But I mean, once he started doing what he could do, it didn't matter. It almost felt like a retirement move or somebody being bullied or beaten up or whatever, and just wanted to come to somewhere nice and safe. I mean, it sounds really weird that somebody's leaving Italy to come to the friendliness of the Rangers support when things aren't going quite well, but however surreal that might seem. But to me, he made more sense than Boli, because we're still in the 3 foreigner rule, and the Italians were doing, which I thought was a smart thing, is you get the real creative players, and you should build your defence, because it's in those days it seemed to be easier to defend to a degree, or should have been, and you just get Scottish players. So to waste a foreigner in your defence, no matter how good he was, particularly when he plays, does he not in almost the same position as your captain?
Yeah, well, we'll get to Boli. I mean, yeah, that's yeah.
But so I mean, Boli was and Boli we'd seen playing. We knew what he could do. I think he scored the winner, didn't he? In the thing, and I mean, he just was, and he was larger than life. On all levels. But I mean, Laudrup, he didn't do anything in Italy. I mean, and we weren't watching the Bundesliga really back in the early 90s because it wasn't on the telly.
Where he did shine, to be fair. I mean, he was a bit of a sensation for Bayern.
No, he was. But
we don't know that
yet.
You
don't see him. Well, who's he?
Yeah,
Whereas
exactly.
we'd seen Italian football, and more often than not, in the season before we signed him, he was on the bench, and he was overshadowed, despite playing really well in 1992, because all of us were conditioned from probably World Cup '86 when Denmark really burst through with Michael Laudrup, and he was firing in goals galore for Barcelona. So the stats might say Brian was more effective at Euro 92. I have no idea.
He was far more effective at 1992 because Michael Laudrup never played in 1992. He had retired, would have fallen out, and could not be persuaded to come back.
No. I mean, that's what that just shows where I am in the whole thing. But there is that is the perception that because Michael Laudrup he does Barca, and then does he go to Madrid?
Yeah,
and score about 3 against Barca.
Yeah.
I mean, he's doing everything, and he's everything which is the opposite of his brother. His brother's obviously looking for a quiet life, and moving from Barca to Real Madrid is somebody who maybe craving a bit of a limelight.
Yes, he fell out with Cruyff and all sorts. And Rangers never pushed it. They brought Laudrup over with his family to see the city, show them, I guess, Cameron House and the surrounding area, maybe the more rural surroundings that they hoped he would call home, but left it completely up to him, and that patience was rewarded. And 2.5 million, maybe 2.3. It's a wee bit unclear how much he signed for, as these transfers always are. But it is very doubtful whether Smith and Murray ever spent money that much as wisely before or since. They spent slightly more on Basil Boli, but they knew him, of course. He played in both the Marseille games. In 92-93, he, as you said, John, larger than life, very physical player, as Mark Catley or Stuart Pearce, and maybe because Rangers could look at what they had on paper, Miko, Hustra, Durant, I guess, as creators. McCoy's returning soon, he'll definitely be back, and even if Hateley has been run into the ground, surely now Duncan will kind of come good, legalities pending, so we have something there. What was the biggest shambles of last season was defensively, and he was the real deal. He was quality, and Follow the first edition of Follow that season has a picture of Boli in the front with the headline "The Terminator has landed." Everyone was just kind of hyped about this. Murray, you couldn't wipe the smile off his face, as I said, but cooler observers may have had some doubts, or certainly should have been sharing some doubts. For most of his time at Marseille, Boli played in a 3-man defence, played mostly as sweeper, certainly played sweeper in the Champions League final. And if he did play in a 4, as I think France were still using, he played on the right-hand side of central defence, where Richard Gough played. Smith's captain, pretty much immovable. So unless he was going to go to a 3, this, yet again, like Duncan, was something that didn't really make sense with the players that Smith had available. And like Duncan, there was an issue with integration. His English wasn't as nearly as good as Laudrup's. He hung around with Haitley and Trevor Stephen a lot because they could speak some French. It was years later, Haitley's book, he writes of his scepticism. He says, I saw Basil as nothing more than a bully and feared that once the typical Scottish strikers got stuck into him, he wouldn't want to know. I was proven right. But no one was really making those pronouncements at the time. His talent was not questioned. What was questioned, because he had other attributes, other characteristics that Scotland's media got stuck into. I will read you a column from the celebrated and much loved Scottish diarist Tom Shields in the week that Boli signed. He said, the signing by Rangers of Basil Boli, the talented black defender, is good news not only for the Ibrox club. It transpires that Mr. Boli is eligible to play for Scotland. His great-great-grandfather had Scottish blood in him. He ate a member of David Livingstone's expedition. I mean, welcome to liberal Scotland, Andy. That's incredible. 1994 for a prominent diarist in the Glasgow Herald. We had a Church of Scotland minister, I think, and a few weeks after this, saying Rangers going out to buy Boli was akin to going out to buy a black pudding. This was quite incredible, that reception. I thought we kind of got all over that with Walters a few years before. So there was that cultural thing. But the football thing didn't really make sense when you started to be a bit cooler about it, because we were all excited by this. This guy scored a win in a Champions League final, right? We are dreadful at the back. 2 + 2 = 4, no?
Aye. I mean, on the race thing, it's worth remembering that even in 1994, progress was slow. And that even when you told me that there, I'm quite shocked that was passable. But on the player himself, you're right. I mean, we lament transfer scouts and forward planning for buying players nowadays when we've got almost a computerized system akin to stock market and stock picking for buying players. And here we are buying a player who was a right. No, he kind of played sweeper for Marseille, didn't he? He used to play in a 3. And we've signed him, and I think as you'll find out, played him all over the place. But it was Goff is the right hand side centre half, and so meant Boli was going to play on the left hand side. The first thing I remember about Boli was that he wasn't as good as your average Scottish centre half in the air. He was competent. He could jump. He had this kind of bounce in his leap. But he wasn't as good. He had an unorthodox method of heading the ball, and it kind of stuck out for me when he signed for us. He was competent enough, he was solid enough, and but the early games didn't help. And I often wonder what would have happened if the games we're going to talk about in this programme panned out differently. But his reputation was greater than the actual, what we got. It wasn't the Basil Boli that I expected to sign, and I think maybe it was perception rather than reality that we were buying into.
I think there's a lot of perception rather than reality that we are buying into around that time. Interestingly, Rangers were after another centre-half. That was another Dane, Mark Reaper from Brøndby. We wouldn't pay what they wanted. Murray at Boli's press conference seemed to kind of dismiss that and was very confident, arrogant, complacent, take your pick, that I'm sure he'll end up here. Is what he said. He'd go to West Ham, I think, for 1.8, 1.9 that summer. But that name might come back to haunt us a wee bit in future years. That may have been the better priority. What of those existing Rangers players whom Smith had promised to rid himself of, because he had big talk after that Dundee United Cup final about who was getting the axe? Well, not many. Certainly not very quickly anyway. Ole Kuznetsov was really the only big name that left that summer on a free transfer to Maccabi Haifa, what could have been, etc. But Gary Stevens, Peter Hoekstra, Fraser Wishart, they would have to wait till later in the season before going. And in the end, there was no dramatic departure for the goalie. Smith has been candid through the years. If an offer had come in, Gorham would have gone. He wasn't playing games, he wasn't at it. He was on the list. Gorham speaks in his book about having kind of mixed feelings. He didn't want to leave Rangers, and he was kind of praying that no offer came in, but on the other hand was a bit miffed that no offer was coming in, and why not? I think his injuries and issues with professionalism were factors for sure, but the bigger factor, according to Gorham when he spoke to people, was his height. English football was moving away from that. It was going towards, David Seaman, Peter Schmeichel, 6'4", 6'3", respectively. I think Gorham was not anywhere near that. Anyway, thankful for all parties that didn't happen. Gorham was allowed to go to Canada straight after the cup final that week, after being sacked effectively or transfer listed, which was a fan event, McCoy's testimonial event, and an Ian Durrant stag do kind of rolled into one. The first night, I think you can guess Gorham's behaviour, and Brown and Durrant had to basically sit him down and tell him to wisen up. You're taking the piss out of the manager here. We don't want you to go, but you're going to have to get in shape. So much so that he was drinking Perrier water at Ian Durrant's wedding until Smith told someone, said, just get him a beer, he's a boring bastard without one. But he worked his backside off, even the shape of his life, by the time the new season came around. John, can you remember any feelings that summer that, all right, Gorham's away, who are we going to get? First of all, because we were talking about priority positions there, when Smith's been as public as he was, you're kind of expecting that he's going to do something with that. Any memories of how that summer transpired, and not only has no one come through the door, but he's still there, and actually he's looking pretty trim?
Well, it was... I know he was transfer listed, but the lack of activity was... I mean, it didn't look like he was going at any point, and the ball was in his court. I felt at that point, and there was no point in buying someone, because who was going to be better if you could get him back? And it did feel a little bit like a shot across the bows from Smith. And sure, if somebody had come in, whoever, down south, and said whatever the number is, because keepers tended not to go for that much in relative terms, then we'd need to have started looking. I'm guessing we would have been... I don't think there was one in Scotland. I mean, that would have got. Would have been
somebody put in the
abroad,
thread.
but...
Somebody put in the thread, actually. I think it was maybe Callum Dinnan. I think. Apologies if not. Would we have got Leighton, because he was the only other, but he was. He's old.
He was damaged goods in all ways.
Yeah, he was. And no, he was having, to be fair, he was having a renaissance at Hibs level, but he was not a Rangers goalkeeper. The whole Gorham-Leighton thing that would transpire for Scotland was completely the invention of a Mr. Craig Brown. There wasn't a choice. There wasn't a contest there. As much of a renaissance as he was having in his career, he also hated Rangers. So I just don't think...
I mean, at all levels... Yeah, and everybody knew he hated Rangers. So
there wasn't anyone else.
No,
think of young goalkeepers. I mean, Alan Main, Craig Nelson. I mean, these aren't boys that are going to come in and do this job.
No. I mean, it's just not going to happen. You're going to have to go and use another foreigner.
Yeah.
I mean, it must be around here. Like, did Man U not have to go to Barcelona and they couldn't play Schmeichel and they got off 4 mil? Was it around 94 time?
It was this season.
You're looking at those kind of things, and it is, you are hoping. And Gorham reminded me of Derek Johnson. He's the best player I've seen in that position, but he wasn't always professional, which upset me. Still does, and therefore, if you get him back trim and everything and fit, he's going to be your number one. And I don't really see any options kicking about elsewhere, either Scottish goalkeepers or anybody leaping off the page. Because by this time, if you're with a big English club, unfortunately, you aren't coming to Scotland.
Yeah, those days are done.
I mean, those days are gone. So you're either going to have to take a risk on a young English keeper, untrested, and we've seen what happened. That can go either way. Andrews at the Tims, or you're going abroad, and I mean, foreign keepers. I mean, we're talking about the underlying racism in the diary. I mean, we are still in the point that foreign keepers don't catch balls.
Yeah.
They don't like crosses. I mean, so none of the
This is 2 years, by the
never
way.
mind
This is 2 years on from Ray Wilkins in the STV studio with him when Marseille came to Ibrox. A young Fabien Barthez was in and said, this boy doesn't like crosses. This boy flaps at everything. Get the big lads on top of him and stuff. Yeah, we're going to win a World Cup and Christ knows what else. But yeah, I think you're right. I mean, Smith is adamant, on the record, off the record, that if something had come in, he would have been off. He had enough. He was pissed off anyway, I think, with the cup final and just the way that had gone. And Gorham, he hoped and for some reason expected to come back and did not aid his training and recovery properly. So he felt it was getting the piss taken out of him, really. So he was furious. But I think, as we've touched on here, that there wasn't an option. I don't think there was a Scottish option, with all due respect. And it is a waste. It's probably one of the reasons that Smith ditched Woods for Gorham in the first place. He was right, I'm not using a foreign slot in goals when there is a goalkeeper coming up, there is a goalkeeper available that's Scottish. So it would have been very, very interesting, but he was there. Pre-season, the Rangers went to Denmark, kind of low-level tour, 3-match tour, not particularly exciting. But the pinnacle of the pre-season was something that was in the works for some months, which was, of course, the Ibrox tournament. The commercial director at the time, Bob Riley, described it as something that could be the most prestigious event in Britain once it was up and running on a kind of annual basis. Those are big words. And I find this actually quite fascinating, that Rangers are not just kind of going through the motions of the pre-season, one glamour Ibrox game and, bang, we're away. It was showbiz and razzmatazz, and I think a kind of desperate cry to the world that we're still here, we're still relevant. Remember when we were the biggest team in the country and in Britain, and we could buy who we wanted, and we're definitely still in that league, aren't we? Definitely. The choice of teams I find interesting. Sampdoria kind of speaks for itself. If you're creating something like this, you have to have a team from Serie A. Sampdoria were in the European Cup final 2 years before, they'd been Italian champions 3 years before, the mix of Italian players with some exotic foreigners, Mihailovic maybe comes into that category, David Platt maybe not, but they were fine, and I had someone sitting next to me on that Friday night with a Sampdoria shirt on, broad Scottish, might have been obviously Scots-Italian, I don't know, but maybe starting to show the impact of Gazzetta and the impact of Channel 4 on your ordinary punter. But I want to ask about the two English teams, and I'm interested in both your opinions on both of them. The choice of Manchester United. There are fans and fanzines and phone-ins and hotlines that the papers would use, who believe there is a rivalry between Rangers and Manchester United. I'm not sure United were aware of that, but that there is this feeling that this is bubbling over. If it is, it's a cold war, because we've never played United at this point in a competitive fixture. But I think, beating Leeds 2 years before, how exciting that was, the respect that Rangers deservedly got, but there was maybe something, in fact, no, there's no maybe, there was definitely something there that, but it wasn't Manchester United. They clearly were the real deal. We want a shot at them. We want to prove ourselves, because I think there's a growing insecurity again about Rangers' decline in position in British football, and there's a desperation to play them, ideally in the final on the Saturday, and kind of put that to bed. Andy, then John, your thoughts or memories around the time of '94 about Rangers in comparison to Manchester United, and Rangers in the context of British football. We'll get to the games in a moment, but it's really more the choice of that opponent.
I think we can look back now and pinpoint this these years, around about this year, either side of it, is the point where we diverged from Manchester United if you're wanting to use them as the benchmark for the best team in England, or biggest club in England. Because we're 2 years into the Premiership.
Yeah, they've done 2 seasons.
2 years. So the friendly tournament itself was probably, looking back on it, as you've quite rightly described, the kind of last throes of our muscle. I think the choice of Man United and Newcastle is pretty... Well, the establishment, the biggest club in England, plus Newcastle at that point with their original noisy neighbours. They weren't backed by an oligarch or a state. That was an unheard thing at that point, but they were throwing a lot of money about under Sir John Hall. They looked as if they were going to become one of the biggest forces in England. They were really exciting to watch. So it was a case of putting ourselves up against them, putting ourselves against the best club in England. I mean, Ferguson had got Manchester United into tremendous shape. This was the start of something special, really. Still hadn't cracked Europe right enough. And then the young upstarts, which was Keegan's Newcastle. And then Sampdoria were pure class, I think. Was this the first time or the second time they came to a tournament? I can't quite recall.
Oh, this is the first time the tournament was there. This was a so it was an inaugural event, but
the inaugural one.
Yeah, but it was more than the
confirmed favourites.
Yeah, it was more on the position of Manchester United, and how we felt, because it felt that we scrappy do wanting to kind of have a go at them, but again, it's this imaginary rivalry. John, am I being harsh there? But I get the feeling that it was only in our heads that this kind of Battle of Britain contest, this clearly two massive clubs, and by far and away the biggest in terms of the balance sheet. In terms of the figures, Rangers were, United had the biggest wage bill, but Rangers were second. But in sporting endeavour, I think this is decreasing quite a bit, and I think this kind of speaks to our insecurity about that.
Okay, I'm going to go my age here, and I don't think this was about Manchester United at all. For people of my generation, I think this was about Ferguson. And whilst we loved 86, 87, I speak personally, but I know from quite a number of them, we were pissed off that he'd went south and ran away from the fight. He'd given us a kicking in the 80s all the way through. He hated us, and just when the thing turned, he disappeared in November 86.
Yeah.
So for me, it wasn't really a Man U kind of thing, because there was no history. I mean, okay, there was back, was it 73, 74 when we torched the Stretford end or whatever. There isn't either a loving or a hate in either way with them, but there is a lot of history between us and Ferguson, and that's the thing. And I mean, man, there is a divergence, but the divergence isn't there because English teams aren't doing it in the Champions League at this point. I mean, when we get put out by the Bulgarians, Man U get put out by Galatasaray, or however you pronounce it, and then they get into the group stage, but only because they were seeded, and then proceeded not to get out. So they aren't, pretty soon they're over the hill that way. I think it's more around an underlying feeling for it's Fergie and the sort of bubbling up of what was there in that early 80s. And also, for people of my age, this is the Texaco Cup, 76, summer of 76, summer of 76. I think Southampton just win it every year or whatever, but I mean, it is this kind of glorified, Willie Waddle had the same idea, Razzmatazz, we'll do it. And Sampdoria were great, and we'd had Newcastle the previous year, but at the end of the day, when you're playing, it's just friendlies to me. I mean, because you're playing one day after the other. It's not as if you've got 3 days apart, rest players, bring back. It's nothing, but I think the Man U thing was a little bit in you younger guys' mind, but I think a lot of it was all to do with Ferguson.
I think Ferguson gave it. We'll pick up on some Ferguson reaction in a minute. It gave it some spice for sure. I don't think David Murray gives a fuck about Alex Ferguson. I think he cares about where Rangers' position is in British football, and that's why Manchester United were invited, because they are the team everybody either wants to be part of or hates because they're so popular. They've won 2 titles in a row. They just won a double. And yeah, I want to speak quickly about Newcastle as well. I don't think it's a surprise or a coincidence, or just they were available that they're here. I know they came for Ali McCoy's testimonial the year before. They were starting to get that entertainers tag, and although this was in place before the World Cup in America happened, I think there's something in a burgeoning need for entertainment. You look at the reviews of Scottish football, it's as if the whole thing is under cloud. And USA 94, and it got some detractors in some way, but it was fun. And it just seemed to be blue skies for every single game. And it was, I guess, maybe because you don't have a particular horse in the race, apart from anyone that's playing Republic Island, I guess. But it was just fun. And we'll talk next week about the kind of burgeoning cult of the individual. And there's always World Cup stars. Of course there are. There always has been, always will be. But with Baggio and Hadji and Stoichkov, for example, they seem to just drive their country on, like beyond where they probably should be, through skill alone. There's no sweat involved. It just looked entertaining and skillful. There's a Scottish newspaper review the day after the final. In the beginning, there was a longing to see Scotland be part of that World Cup carnival of colourful supporters and exciting players, but in the end the feeling was one of relief that our players were not there. Scotland would have been out of place in America. The World Cup finals, which were brought to a close in Pasadena yesterday, were a celebration of football. They were about skill, goals and entertainment, all qualities which have been banished from the Scottish game. I think Rangers are aware of this, John, and I think Newcastle again bring something show busy, and Rangers are desperate to be part of something that is brighter than the drudgery that we're going to see week by week.
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, I've got to say I gave up on that World Cup after Italy's first game. The House of Orange kind of restored my belief slightly, but yeah, I was so upset with Italy from that first game that they played that it just, it wasn't a high point. It was entertaining, but it wasn't. But Newcastle were an entertaining team. And to be fair, Man U were an entertaining team. I get what you say about Murray. He thought of himself the same as a butcher's boy, I think it was there. But I mean, Newcastle were fun. You know, Kevin Keegan was a rich man's Tommy Burns at this. It would turn out. But they were a lovely team to watch. I mean, they just generally were. If you could watch an English team at this point, if you had no association, you would watch them because they played wonderful football. And you're right. I mean, the World Cup did have the Baggios, the Hadjis, all of these guys. Maybe we thought we were getting it in Boli, when it turns out we were getting it with the other one. I mean, I've expunged a lot in 94, 95, apart from that number 11 in Royal Blue running about. But I think we felt 93, 94, particularly after 92, 93, was turgid. And I think 93, 94 was the last 44 game season. Yeah,
it was. We're into 36. And we're into 3 points for a win. My goodness. Something's actually,
it's exciting. Yeah.
How many years of England with 3 points for a win? And it's taken us to 1994 to bring that in. And they saved me a wee bit here. This is why we have the multi-generational thing. I was now, Italia 90 was my World Cup. I could tell you now where I was for just about every single game. But it was from Diana Ross onwards, this was just enjoyable. And you needed a bit of that, because I just, watched, as John said, that 44 game season where we only win 22 of them. You're wanting something a bit more entertaining, a bit more skillful, just a bit more than aerial balls, bombardment. It was like the Somme at times watching Rangers.
USA 94 changed football on the heels of Italia. And as you say, I'm the same. Italia 90 was iconic. But we often spoke about football being a global game, but it wasn't, because the US market was still a mystery and football was a mystery to it. And 94 changed it. But you're right, the football itself was pretty spectacular, and the cult of the individual, because that's what happens in American sport. You've got your quarterback or the team that the basketball team's built around. There's always a superstar there, and you've seen them come to the forefront. You've mentioned a couple of them. It changed the way we looked at football in the rest of the world, or particularly Europe, because we had often, for the Sky, what were the Sky cheerleaders called? I can't remember. What were they called? Rockets or something?
Something. I got that. I'll come back to it.
And the pishy fireworks used to get for Monday night football. There was attempts at trying to bring in some of the razzmatazz that you would see in NFL and so forth, but it just fell flat in its face because the culture didn't support it. Fireworks at Ewood Park didn't work. It just didn't work.
Coventry on a Monday night. Yeah,
exactly.
It was.
Well, when you look back at it now, you see that was the start of the trajectory for what we have now in the Premiership, and there's a direct line from there to there. So 94 changed things. I've never ever even contemplated how it changed things for Rangers. I don't know. I think we were kind of probably left behind the slipstream of it, because if we're saying that the English Premiership took 20 years to catch up with that, to make the razzmatazz valid and actually no look out of place, I don't know if we're even there yet.
No, but we're trying. And again, and I know it's not a new idea, John. I know we've kind of tried this before, but the way we've marketed it, and again, it's trying to say, look, we're still relevant up here. Florian Radicoi was one name like with us, the Romanian, who looked superb. I think he ended up going to West Ham and then just didn't appear for training or even a game because he just wanted to go shopping around London with his wife. So, maybe we missed out in a good way. Very quickly, Rangers and United would meet, but not in the way that I think David Murray had hoped. Rangers played Sampdoria on the Friday tea time. The debut of that purple strip that we, for some reason, seemed to want to reincarnate. And really looked good for a while. We're 2-0 up, should have been more. Hateley missed, I think, the worst sitter I think I've ever seen. And then Samp obviously went up a few gears. Lombardo was sensational. Newcastle beat United on penalties, I think, and later on in that other semi-final. So Rangers played Manchester United in the third, fourth playoff with a completely changed 11, by the way, apart from Ali McCoy. So he started both games. Rangers won 1-0. David May own goal. There's some of United's youngsters that we've gone to know very well, such as David Beckham playing that Saturday afternoon, and Eric Cantona was playing that Saturday afternoon and lunged through Stephen Presley, or tried to, and was sent off. And this is the ridiculous nature of football law at the time. He missed the first 2 games of the English League season because of that red card in a friendly. He would miss very much more as that particular season went on. That's a story for another evening. Ferguson was furious really with the whole thing because United players were just abused, booed all the time. Steve Bruce complained about it at lunchtime before the Rangers game. Ferguson talked after, Rangers are a club with ambition. Their directors and manager have great ambitions, but their support doesn't live up to these ambitions. Their supporters are not big time. He said the behaviour of the fans stupid and pointless. If they're going to boo every good team which comes to Ibrox for friendlies, then teams might stop coming. Sampdoria beat Newcastle 3-1. And Rangers fans were talking about the real quiz, which of course was the Battle of Britain. But any thoughts of superiority outside of Scotland were an illusion, and that would be proved very quickly. Now Rangers knew that the competitive start of the season would come in Europe. Not the Premier League season. They'd known for months that was the case, just because of the calendars post World Cup. And yet, when that draw was announced, Brian Laudrup says in the pre-season video that he knew that Rangers were going to likely be another season without playing in the Champions League. He said after just 4 weeks of preparation, we weren't up for it. We weren't ready because of the new players coming in. He thought that Athens were one of the worst teams that we could get. Now again, we knew a wee bit of what AEK Athens would provide, which is the hostile atmosphere. Maybe only Galatasaray were more notorious in Europe at that time. But from a footballing perspective, Rangers were seeded in the qualifying round. This was quite a funny draw for UEFA because they had 8 qualifiers, so 16 teams qualifying, and 8 teams already seeded and in the group. So the 4 groups were there. The 2 seeds were in their group, so the qualifiers knew what group they were going into. So Rangers and Ike and Casino Salzburg and Maccabi Haifa knew that if they won, they were going into Group D, which had easily the two best teams in the tournament. Milan, who were reigning champions, and that season's winners, Ajax, who would beat Milan in the final. So even when Rangers don't get to the Champions League, they're still involved in the toughest draw possible. In terms of qualifications, Sparta Prague were available, our old foes from a few years before. Hajduk Split were buoyant, Croatian football being kind of unleashed now, but there were definitely easier matches. Servette of Switzerland, Maccabi Haifa, Vac Samsung, Silkeborg of Denmark, and Evenir Beggen of Luxembourg. And even if the first leg had been at Ibrox, that first proper game of the season, it might have given Rangers a chance to grow into some form before going to Greece. But I guess there was no early season evidence to suggest that that would have been particularly material. Okay, Wednesday, 10th of August 1994. John, I think it's hard to overstate just how much of a mess this evening was. Off the pitch, Rangers bust, players, officials were bottled. Ian Durrant was very close, I think, to an injury. There were flares thrown into the 750 Rangers supporters. Flags went on fire. I think Athens was fined £26,000 later on because of that. But on the field, my word, Boli couldn't play. He was suspended, incredibly, still serving a suspension from a booking in the 1993 final. Marseille, of course, weren't involved in the next season in Europe. And maybe echoes of Souness. Remember when he knew Kuznetsov was coming and he went to a 3 anyway, even before he was in place. Smith decided to go for a back 3, even though Boli wasn't playing. Now, even though he was aging, John Brown was on the bench. Dave McPherson was on the bench. John Brown would go on to have a really good season the next season, so, still a bit of life in the old dog yet. But he's left-footed. He could play on the left-hand side of a 3, perhaps. Not Gary Stevens, one of the best right-backs I've ever seen at the club, but was coming to the end so much so that Smith had transfer listed him. He's asked to play in the left of a 3-man defence, with Richard Gough at the centre and a young Stephen Presley on the right-hand side of that 3. 21-year-old Neil Murray playing on the right wing-back. This was mental. If he wanted to use Gary Stevens, just play a 4. He's got the players to play a back 4, pushed Neil Murray into midfield, something he's done before in the Champions League 2 years before. 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Rangers have Andy Gorham to thank for the match to be remotely a contest at the end of it. He was superb. A goal in each half. The first one kind of reminiscent a wee bit of Levski. The ball kind of bobbling about at the edge of the box. The boy just rattles it in. Goff's a disaster for the second. Gorham does well to save, but he can't do anything about the rebound. A chap called Dimitris Saravakos on his debut, which kind of puts Brian Laudrup's thoughts about needing weeks and weeks and weeks to gel and get right into the shade a wee bit. Laudrup was lucky if he saw the ball, never mind touched it that night. Smith said, after I tried the wrong defensive tactics for the game in the first half and they didn't work. System, John, that they'd never played before. Now that's a risk in any game, but in such an important tie where Archie Knox is going to see them in pre-season saying, look, they're looking pretty lively. So much riding on it. You know what the atmosphere is going to be like. This was a ridiculous decision and ultimately a very costly one. I think maybe Unarea in years to come might shade it, but I think this is Smith's worst night in Europe.
Oh, absolutely. On every level. I don't think we even tried 3 at the back in the pre-season friendlies against Sampson and Man U. I mean, if you're going to be thinking about it, you play it, and I mean, you look at our signing policies that year. Obviously, is Davy Robertson injured at this point? We don't have a fullback. I mean, Gary Stevens was a Rolls Royce at fullback, but no longer. I mean, that tackle was at Airdrie 18 months before. Yeah. I mean, he's done.
He's literally on the list. And by the way, about right wing backs and using Stevens, even when Stevens was more at his prime in 1990, Bobby Robson, when England went from a 4 to a 3-5-2, he got Paul Parker because he felt he was just a better engine. So
But I mean,
But even
it's
then,
just, I mean, Presley's been a bomb scare. I mean, there's nothing about it that makes any sense. As you say, if you're playing three, A, you try it. B, okay, you must know that Boli can't play in the game. I mean, you see that the tactics this night are a shambles. They don't get much better the next time around. And this is a team which don't do well. They put everything into getting into the Champions League. But, I mean, Greece are just back from the World Cup. I forgot they'd been. But I looked up. I mean, they get hammered 3 times. Never scored a goal, lost 10. So they're in the low ebb. Ike have actually thrown up a lot of their players and come down in this 33-year-old debutant. So it turns up. I mean, there's nothing about it that actually says, what are we doing? And it is hostile. I mean, I've got friends that went there and they said it was like nothing they'd ever been, despite it was a 20-odd thousand crowd. I mean, it was nothing like 45, but it was more the stadium would be akin to Brockville, shall we say, with flares and the heat at that time. And I think the heat was the thing that worried me more than Athens, because teams running that great in Europe at this point, or at any point actually, really. There was you just go there and shut up shop, surely. Slow the game down, take the sting out of it. Do simple things. Why risk the 3 at the back in this game when you've got more than 3 defenders? No, and why put? It's almost like he's rolled the dice. I mean, it's like, what is it, game of chance or whatever? Right, 3 or 4. We've got to play 3. Right, put the names in the hat. Who's come out? Gary Stevens. Right, your left hat. I mean, it is just, despite the fact you're just about to go to Tranmere. I mean, nothing makes sense in any shape or form. You get Neil Murray, Stephen Presley. I mean, does that not tell you? Because Neil Murray had a good 92, 93. He's not come on in 93, 94. He does feel like a one-season wonder. Presley hasn't come on in that time. I mean, we're blowing 5 million on Laudrup and Boli, and we've blown 4 million on Ferguson the previous year. I mean, what is our recruitment policy like? I mean, there is no plan. Fullbacks we don't have, creative midfielders, not really anymore. Trevor Stevens about, but
he's a ghost. He's a ghost
past
now,
his
isn't
prime.
He?
He can show touches, but I mean, we're just, and it's not as if we don't have money. It's not like, you might argue nowadays, dare I say, where every penny's a prisoner. I mean, back then we were launching cash about, but I mean, Boli only works, and I'm not advocating. I did advocate selling it. Boli only works if you get rid of Goff.
Yeah,
he's 5 years younger. I could see. I wouldn't necessarily agree. I could see the logic in saying, look, Goff's coming up to 32. Boli's 5 years younger, although actually he pretty much retires from this season onwards.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll see. You can't rely on it. You can't sack your captain and put all, like they were talking about gambles here, but absolutely, so don't bring him. So don't bring him in. Totally agree.
Go out and get a couple of fullbacks.
Yeah.
Get a creative midfielder, which we do in Laudrup. But and that night is just, I mean, everybody talks it's the worst draw. This is post-rationalisation of unbelievable. I don't remember us having that much fear about Athens, but I think we worried about the atmosphere, both in terms of the fans and the heat. I don't think we were saying, put it this way, they went into the Champions League and they get 2 points out of 12. Yeah.
But compared to what we got, that's what I mean. Even if the first leg was at Ibrox, Andy, it just maybe gives you something else, because this is new for Rangers, new for Scottish clubs, that your first test of the season is a Champions League qualifier. Your first game of the season is your most important financially for the whole thing. Now, that's a bit mental, actually. That's new territory, but we knew it. It wasn't a surprise. Not a surprise that Boli couldn't play. We weren't prepared for it. And although Laudrup, at the end of the season saying, we 4 weeks wasn't enough, when he signed and he's asked about Europe, he said, it's really tough, but I think Rangers can maybe do it in 2 years. So he knew that this team are nowhere near it, and it's going to take more than just me.
The Champions League qualifiers every summer, and it was the summer, it was like a big train that every year we've seen coming down the tunnel. We could see the lights, we could hear it going choo-choo, and we never ever done anything about it. It was a wing and a prayer, and we hoped that we get through it. And the way we hoped to get through it was by spending money on players like Laudrup and Boli or Ferguson the year before. It was the ultimate tightrope, and invariably we were falling off it. And this one was... I mean, I remember it. I don't think the first leg was shown on the telly, but I don't know if even playing that first leg at Ibrox would have made that much a difference, because the highlights of that first game in Greece are on YouTube. There's a good 8 minutes of it, and even if it's just all the Ike chances, they could have won the game about 20 times over. But utterly shambolic. You can see that for the highlights. We're all over the place. Players are having individual nightmares. You know, Gary Stevens, a seasoned international, he was kind of... I think he was done by then. I don't think that's cool to say that. He was well past his best, and his fitness would never back to where it was. And Saravakos is one of the names that, you know, it's there in the back of your memory somewhere, that when you hear it, you're like, Christ, Athens. Just like Turkey Yilmaz or Zitelli or Nemechek, names like that bring back a hidden nightmare for the back of your memory that you thought you'd forgotten about. It was a disaster, and John's exactly right to question. I mean, this 3 at the back shenanigans. It was the ultimate amateur hour from Walter Smith, and it hadn't been tried, it hadn't even been thought about as a concept. And even if we had, the execution of it, as you say, Martyn, in terms of the deployment of the players that we had at our disposal, was, you know, it was like back of fag packet stuff. It's no wonder when we look back now that it was such a disastrous night.
It was as if he'd turned his back and Archie Knox had shouted numbers, and he'd picked the team that way. It makes absolutely no sense. Anyway, we move on.
But the other thing you got to see, though, I didn't play any games before us either. This is their first one. It's not as if they're... No, they're further behind. Their league season doesn't start to 28th August.
But I bet they weren't refuelling like our players doing. That's the difference.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. But I mean, and they've had more of a turnover. They get rid of... They'd won the league, but they get rid of all the forwards on the left, and they brought in new ones. And
this is why Laudrup's thing about 4 weeks, new players, 2 players, one of whom didn't play. Anyway, Rangers do start their defensive title on the Saturday home to Alex McLeish's Motherwell. Tommy McLean leaves Motherwell, never known anything but Tommy McLean in charge of Motherwell. He moved over to Hearts. And Brian Laudrup's introduction to Scottish football is pretty hefty. I think a few minutes gone, he's put in his arse by Rab McKinnon, no foul. He doesn't complain, he dusts himself off, he goes again. Actually, he spoke later, said, look, Scottish football's fine like that. They're trying to get the ball. It's rough, but they're trying to get the ball. In Italy, they don't care. They're just to get you, and that's what I've got no time for. His impact was pretty much immediate. A brilliant cross for Hateley to put Rangers 1 up. Motherwell equalised early in the second half. Richard Gough gave away a penalty. Tommy Coyne, who moved there, equalised. Things are getting tense, especially with the result in Greece still in the back of people's minds, and Laudrup picks the ball up from the edge of one box, takes it to the edge of the other, lays it for his teammate to slot it away with 3 minutes to go. I guess the press and fans alike should have maybe been talking more about this incredible Scottish debut. Maybe 2 reasons why they didn't. Firstly, the attention was on who scored it. It was Duncan Ferguson, who got that winner. And could it happen? Could the bad boy turn good? Could this be exactly what he didn't get at the start of the last season? Is this going to turn things around? And secondly, what was about to come ensured that no Rangers player would be talked about in glowing terms for some time. Rangers did their usual against Arbroath in the League Cup by dispatching them with a lot of goals. 6-1, Duncan Ferguson hat-trick, before making slightly heavy weather of Partick Thistle at Firhill. 2-0 was the score. Hateley in an own goal, just about ensuring Rangers kept full points in the league. But everything was focused on this return of Ike to Ibrox on the 24th of August. Smith called in the fans to play their part. I think Basil Boli did in the Sunday Mail. He said something, we can win 6-0 if the crowd get behind us. What he might not have known then was that he would be expected to play at right back. Boli said later to France Football that Smith had phoned Franz Beckenbauer, who had played me at right back before, but you all saw what happened, but I was not the worst player on view. So Boli's playing... Boli played on the left-hand side of the centre defence at Firhill. Dave McPherson plays at right back. Dave McPherson is not a natural right back, but he played there through that glorious 92-93 season. And then Smith switches it, says it's not a gamble because we needed to go for it. Now, Boli has a threat from set pieces, but he's not a bombing, quick fullback. I don't know what he's doing there. Again, he goes back to the Ferguson-Haitley thing, but Jury's there now and Laudrup. So Duncan Ferguson's pushed effectively wearing number 11, or he might not be wearing number 11, but he was out on the left wing for most of the game. This is just mental. The crowd, by the way, can I just say, and I've long argued this, the crowd before the game and at kickoff was up there in terms of noise. Was up there with Marseille, and I wasn't at Kiev, but I'm sure that it comes into that equation. Parma, Leipzig, real let's go. We know it's required here. Still this kind of best of British thing that it's Ibrox. This is bigger than Athens. We can really terrify them. And it was loud. It really was quite spine tingling. And then the football started, and the Greeks kind of killed the tie just before half time. And like Andy, this was devastating. Levski, you can write off one of those things, right? The capricious nature of cup football. But this was more worrying for any Rangers fan or a chairman who was talking things up that European football, the top level, could be consistently realised. And it was a shock to the outside world as well, by the way. Louis van Gaal, who's the Ajax coach at the time, expecting to see Rangers in that group. They're one of the biggest clubs in Europe, and I was convinced they would go through to their preliminary round. I'd even begun studying the players and had not paid any attention to the Greeks. But I guess it was the manner that was telling. If there was any football cloud, by the way, hovering over USA 94, apart from Diego's drugs and Colombian assassinations, it was Greece. They stunk the place out. They were dreadful. And here you are, getting knocked out, toughed out, 3-0 in aggregate by their champions. Johan Cruyff was also quoted, also the soft spot for the Scots, their enthusiasm is infectious, their players probably have the best spirit of any in the world, but while Scottish football can be entertaining, all too often the quality of play is not of the required standard. There are too many hod carriers and not the quality of play, not enough creators now. You cannot have a team of 11 of them and be successful. The Scots concentrate on strength and physique, where I have always picked players for their skill. Over £5 million spent, and these notions of grandiose tournaments and Champions League qualification. We're playing the part of a big team in Europe, and it's an act.
And it's a major blow to the ego. We're talking about the tournament there and how we visualise ourselves as a peer, never mind a rival to Man United. And it's to this point you've got to walk the walk, and we were drunk, to be honest. We were staggering into the gutter because the kind of accusations that were thrown there for Cruyff and Van Gaal about the kind of notion that Scottish football was still a technical backwater was too close to home. It was the truth. And we spent a lot of money between Laudrup and Boli, over £5 million there, which nowadays would be a lot of money for us to spend.
Only 3 English teams that summer spent more than that, to put it into perspective.
There you go. So the fact that we were getting our arse handed to us home and away in the first round, the Champions League, which a couple of seasons ago we thought we were going to win, we had a chance of winning it. It was embarrassing, and it sucked to life because there was no UEFA Cup as it was.
Yeah, no parachute was there.
You're out, and that was your season burst before it actually really started in earnest. The game itself, I remember, as you say, the atmosphere was electric. It was greatly aided by the Greek fans. I was quite taken aback by them. They were pretty mental to look at, that yellow and black in the bottom of the Broomloan. And the goal itself was, amateur. It was, if I've got it right, this is the one where David Robertson kind of does a similar missed kick to the one he done in Marseille a couple of years earlier, and it gives the ball away in a right bad area in the middle of the park, and he punishes. And as soon as that ball goes in the net, well, the time was a tall order as it was before that, but you're 3-0 down, so it's done and dusted. And it's I would say ego. Your ego is burst because you're back to the humdrum. Us versus a pretty poor Celtic team, even though they're resurgent, and the dreams are dashed for another year, and we can't look at ourselves in the mirror, to be honest, because we're not what we think we are.
John, very quickly, because we've got a couple of games to cover before we wrap up, but he's outdone himself, really, in a way, in terms of team selection and formation and whatever. From one diagonal to the other, Duncan Ferguson, the left winger, and Basil Boli, the right back.
Everything. I mean, we spent 10 million over the past year with Ferguson, Jerry, whatever. And I remember this night before, Jerry McNee was in Scotsport or whatever, and he said, I'm at Ibrox, Rangers have never pulled back 2 goals, but I fully expect them to win 5-0 tonight. And it was even more depressing for me, if that's possible, than you guys, because Ibrox has been a fortress for all of my memorable life. I was working out, there's only 4 teams that have beaten us up to this point, which was Ajax, the best team in the world, Saint Etienne, European Cup finalists that year, Valencia with Kempes, and then Bayern Munich. And to get beat by this team of hotel waiters, and they aren't that good. I mean, Ike finished 5th in the Greek league. Their owner gets tried at that point for oil smuggling, and they've got financial difficulties. I mean, this is how Walter actually survived this, I have no idea, actually, in retrospect. With this and what's to come next.
Yeah, what's to come next, really.
Yeah, but even this, I mean, the 2 selections for the games to get into playing Milan, Ajax, where we think we should be, they are... I mean, at best, it's somebody spinning a roulette wheel for the numbers, or somebody in drugs. And it's just... And the worst thing is watching the end of season video, which I'd never watched until... I mean, the delusionality of the players and even Walter about why things went wrong early on, because we were still settling in a team and everything. And they actually look in their eyes and they believe it. You're thinking, no, it's just... It was amateur hour to an nth degree, which I don't think we'd ever had it until now. You said, Levski, Sofia, and also when we get put out by Prague, it was fine lines. Levski, Sevilla score in injury time, Prague score with that sort of fluke in extra time. But we win at Ibrox, and it's those, all Scooby-Doo, those damn pesky away goals rules again. We've not laid a glove in. Did we actually ever have a shot on target or look at scoring the night of the game?
It was brutal. The following morning, the BBC's Chick Young travelled to Ibrox for his usual kind of pre-game interview for the following evening's Friday sports scene. What was eventually broadcast was nothing like the first attempt, which became a VHS legend in the 90s and a YouTube hit for the next generation.
Last night, 2 of the disappointments to part were the big money signings from Europe this summer, Boli and Laudrup. Would you go along with that?
No, I'm not answering that.
Well, what I'm trying to say is that you've gone out and spent at the highest level. We think the highest level, and you have to. Is the standard of player in Europe at the top level is higher again? Are you going to have to go and match the AC Milans and pay these kind of fees?
I'm not following your line of questioning.
Well, we spent £5 million, Walter, in the summer on good players, but these players seemingly are not good enough at the highest level in Europe.
I don't think you can say that. I mean, how can you say that? Well, I mean, they've just came into place, haven't they? I mean, you've got to give everybody a chance to settle. I mean, you're saying Boli and Laudrup can't play in Europe?
No, I'm saying that...
Well, we've got a European Cup winners medal, for fuck's sake. You can't say he's not a good enough player to play in Europe.
Well,
that's fucking stupid, isn't it?
Well, at the end of the day...
but that's what you're saying. What I'm saying to you is, obviously there's... I mean, you can't say that Boli and Laudrup can't fucking play. I mean, Laudrup played 7 games out of 10 for AC Milan last year, And Boli played in the team that's won the European Cup and only never played in it last year because they were banned. You can't say he can't fucking play in Europe.
Well, at the end of the day...
Fuck's sake. What a fucking job. You've been up all night working at it. I thought, they're not good enough to play in Europe. That was your fucking words to me.
But
they one of you fucking laughing,
Billy,
Jesus Christ. That was your words to me there. They two are not good enough to play in Europe. Fuck me.
The team...
Archie, come on here, this fucking interview. That's it, just fucking say the interview and we'll keep, well, he's coming out with worse shite than that.
Like his fucking arse if it was me. I must admit.
You can't be fucking serious at that.
Alright, that's what I was waiting for. I got that. I'm sure you want to start a bit again. The Rangers fans, what I'm trying to get at is the Rangers fans are demanding or hoping for...
Your questions to the chairman last week were fucking shite and all right. And this week's exactly the fucking same. If we had a bad night last night, you're having a fucking horrendous one now.
What? Well, you did have a bad night last night.
That's what I said to you. Well, if we...
So
you're having an equally fucking bad one now.
Look at the post-mortem of it.
Aye, but you turn around and say to me, you're both two players, if they're not good enough to play in Europe, fuck me, but... Well, one of them, 1, 2, 3, 4,
do you not agree with me that the two of them didn't play well last night?
But that doesn't mean to say they're not good enough to play in Europe. Surely they fucking proved that on many occasions before.
Alright. So,
fuck's sake. I mean, that's silly stuff you're coming out with there.
Okay, I got the video. I can't remember when, if it was later on in this season or maybe even into the next by video VHS physical thing that you had to put in a machine and rewind. It was grainy. It was obviously being passed around, a kind of Christmas party thing. And now it's got a second life, hasn't it, on YouTube, and it's been enjoyed many times by the whole of the footballing world. Despite the kind of evisceration that Chick Young gets and the entertainment that always provides, he did have some points that were just maybe kind of badly made. Laudrup and Boli were poor, and Smith I think is a bit churlish to say I'm not answering that. He could have gone on to say, was Boli poor because you played him at right back? And he, the language in the follow-up question again is stupid to say, can these two play at this level? And Walter's right to kind of take him to task. I think he's deflecting quite a bit. But maybe there is a fair line of inquiry. Boli hasn't played there for a year. Does he still have it? Laudrup struggled in Italy. Was this the evidence why he struggled? And even if they were at their peak, even if we were buying these two quality players, with this increasing obsession about the individual, give the ball to Brian, was it ever going to be enough in an increasingly intelligent, organised team sport? Did Rangers have the money to buy enough anyway? Enough of those players? And could they even play them because of the UEFA regulations? There's something in Young's kind of mangled English that is fair. And I think it shows Andy the absolute pressure that Smith was suffering that morning.
I checked it almost too feared to ask the question he should have asked. He was trying to get to it in a roundabout way. Yeah. And he would have been totally justified in it because the playing a Boli right back was ludicrous. And to be fair, Laudrup wasn't at top gear. At that point, he'd shown flashes of brilliance, obviously, and we could see that we had a player and a half, but it wasn't far off what you just said, which is give the ball to Laudrup. And that was our game plan. And it would be for a couple of seasons after that, him and a couple of others, maybe, if you're lucky, but any criticism that came the morning or the week after that game was totally justified. And I often wonder, I mean, when things go wrong nowadays, we always think back and say, how would Twitter world withstand this week when we get knocked to by BBC Celtic and get knocked to the cup with Falkirk? And it's a fair question, but looking back now, I think that Walter Smith and the Ibrox hierarchy probably get off pretty lightly by comparison. You look at us just now, we've qualified for the Champions League, we're just off the back of Europa Cup final, and there's nice hell to pay for some.
Yeah, but he's got 6 championships in a row, I guess, in the bank, which does help, and it does buy a bit. But what you're right in saying, things are boiling over. And yeah, you can put the Levski thing down to a freak in Sparta, as John said. There's now a creeping concern that we don't have this. He doesn't have this at this level. But thankfully, we're back to domestic football on the Saturday, this kind of thing that we're maybe a wee bit more pitched at. Celtic due to arrive at Ibrox, this time with another new manager. Lou Macari was one of the first casualties of the Fergus McCann regime. He was taking them to court for unfair dismissal, so much so that later on the season Celtic played a League Cup semi-final at Ibrox, so they'd be due money. Rangers would take the gate receipts, then pay it out to the clubs involved, and they couldn't. Celtic's account was arrested because Macari had them on the ropes. Tommy Burns was the next old boy that they'd gone back to, who had a great start in managerial career with Kilmarnock, the surprise package of the season before. Celtic eventually had to pay, I think, 100 grand or so for tapping up Tommy Burns, one of the most archaic, draconian institutions in Scottish sport at the time. This nonsense that you can't go and ask a question of an adult whether they'd like to go and take a new job. Unlike the previous encounter, Celtic had fans back at the game in the Brillman Road. Sadly, just like the previous encounter, John Collins whipped a free kick into the top bin, and there was no lucky deflection to bring us back. Paul McStay made it 2 early in the second half in an incredibly insipid performance. Take that were there, or some of them. Robbie Williams and Mark Owen, I think, were there in their new Rangers kits. Again, Smith's choices, 4 centre-halves he plays. Presley, McPherson, Boli and Gough, I think. Only Gough playing in his rightful position. The midfield engine room now of Ian Ferguson and Stuart McCall's really starting to malfunction. It's starting to really, really look old, and it's boiling over. Smith and the players received a torrent of abuse, and according to Neil Drysdale, the Scotsman, one fan made his way close to the director's box to call David Murray a fucking cripple. Andy was right. How did they survive this? People forget, John, just how bad this tension was, because this was awful this day.
It was awful. I'm just looking at the two teams. I'm looking at this Tim's defence. Oh, and I've not worked out whether Galloway or Grant are playing it right back, but McNally, Mackay and Boyd are up against Laudrup, Haitley and Jury. And we don't lay a glove in this lot. I mean, this isn't a good Celtic team. This is Walker and Donnelly up front. I mean, they've got, give it granted, they've got McStay and Collins. After that, they have maybe a workman like McGinley who always gets a goal. And that's it. And we've gave up in fullbacks. We just, obviously Davy Robertson's injured, and while Scary Stevens might be fine for playing the left side of defence in Athens, he obviously can't play right back instead of, I don't know, was it Presley, McPherson? I mean, what were we on? Was there mushrooms or something in the match meals? Or I mean, looking at all these team selections. And it's not a good Celtic team. I mean, McStay scores with a shot for outside the box or just inside, which it seems to trickle forever. I mean, it is just... And there is that fury from the real shock of getting beat by Ike and A, losing to a team like that at Ibrox in Europe, and B, not to be in the Champions League again after, we're still thinking back to all our trips, 92, 93. But, it's Celtic, so we'll beat them and everything will be rosy in the garden. And we lose to them poorly, don't score, their fans are there, they're going mental. And we are all over the place. This is... I don't think... I really, Andy said, how did we survive with the management team at all intact and the players or whatever? Because, yeah, I would say we're more emotional and knee-jerk now, but this is, I would argue this is way beyond anything even recently.
It's that
Particularly when we
concentration.
throw in the next one.
Yeah, it's that concentration, which I'll come to in a moment.
And following on from the United Scottish Cup final.
Yeah, there's that hangover, isn't it?
I mean, this is... Because we haven't kicked a ball since, what, about March? Because we draw with the Tims at Ibrox. I don't think... Did we win a game in the last 5 or something?
Last 6 games, including the Scottish Cup final. Yeah. So it is a bleed.
I mean,
it's a bleed.
Is a continuation.
Yeah.
And you know, and I mean, they've put everything into it. I mean, they get beat by Panathinaikos. Their league doesn't start. I mean, it's not good teams we're getting beat with, and there's nothing. You're looking at this team and you're saying, unless you see it laid out, you have no idea what our formation is.
Yeah.
On any level, there is no structure, no plan, and there's 10 million quid's worth of a talent in there, plus a Gorham and a Goff who are still excellent players. And I would argue Ian Ferguson is coming off its very good season. So it's not that you can say we don't have good players. It's just formation, application. There's nothing.
Andy,
I'll pass on to Andy.
Yeah, Andy, I'd say this was a shock, disaster, whatever. But we've seen it before with Smith. We've seen it the previous season, of course. We didn't beat Celtic in 2 games. Ibrox in the league obviously did in that League Cup neutral 50-50 thing. We've kind of seen this kind of anemic performance in Smith's first season as well. His record at home to Celtic in that first term is absolutely garbage. But yeah, I'll move it on, and I'll try and ask you to kind of sum up the entire week, because the Wednesday night sees Brian Laudrup score his first goal for Rangers at home to Falkirk in the League Cup, which is now the Coca-Cola League Cup. So, you know, again, standard fare for Rangers. Love this competition. Haven't been out the quarterfinals since 1980, or out before the quarterfinals. But that Laudrup goal was an equaliser. It was sandwiched between 2 Richard Cadet Falkirk goals. Small, quick, kind of clever player, a lot of mobility, causes a lot of problems. Jim Jeffries, the new manager, I think he's just been promoted. They're in good fettle, but still, this just put a bow on that week. We've talked on this show about the first part of Smith's first full season, with Gorham struggling. That was pressure. Sparta Prague, Hibs in the Skull Cup. That weird months of nonsense, really, in 93-94. But as intense, it's the concentration of these 3 home defeats to teams that shouldn't have beat us. 3 different competitions. And on 31st of August, Rangers are looking at the Scottish Premier Division now until the Scottish Cup comes around. This is surely the kind of hardest point. I mean, Rangers are a joke, and pundits and fans are loving this, as you'd expect. Andy Walker goes on Radio Clyde to say, I hear there's a new supporters group called Gers for Change. It's just, there's people phoning in saying I'm not renewing next year because the quality is just garbage. I think this is probably the lowest Smith is in this period.
I think that's a fair comment. I mean, there was a combination of this was the time that a lot of people have been waiting for, the fall from grace.
Yeah.
And I don't know if people really believed that we weren't going to still win the league. And I know in this show we've often spoken about us being garbage and things looking bleak, but us still knowing that we were going to win the league. But that Falkirk game just put a tin lid on it. Richard Cadet, he was a kind of similar kind of style to Dougie Arnott to us, you know, he was a pain in the arse. That was a shock. And I mean, is it possible we could foresee that we get put out of the Champions League in the first round? Aye. Do we occasionally get beat off Celtic? Aye. Would we get beat in a midweek, you know, run-of-the-mill procession in the League Cup? No, that doesn't happen. And it did. And looking back, I can't remember how I dealt with this. I think I just buried my head in the sand because the thing you've got to remember,
You're almost
Martyn,
laughing.
the support. Yeah, it was so incredible. But as a support, I spoke about how your bubbles burst in the Champions League because you're out, and that is it. There is no Europe this season. There was a huge motivation there for fans that just totally dissipated those 3 games because, you know, out of Europe, beat by Celtic, and then out the League Cup, which was our staple. You know, we looked forward to getting to the cup final and winning the first trophy of the season more often than not. So it was a major blow. And looking back on it, I don't know why there was no more questions about Smith and the way the football side was getting run. You're correct, man, in saying that the 6 in a row was kind of unimpeachable, but I do remember the likes of Fall of Wanzing, there was some very, very severe criticism, and it was starting to point towards the unthinkable, which was that we needed fresh blood in the dugout.
Step aside, yeah.
That's where we were.
Yeah, a foreign manager to and Murray was getting back, or Murray was getting defended because he said, well, he's given Smith, as John said, over 10 million over the course of 12 months. There's going to be another nearly 2 coming up on the centre half they should have signed, 12 months before. But here we go. This really is on Walter, and it's tough. And compare it with that start to 93-94. We lose to Kilmarnock at home, but we bounce back against Aberdeen in the League Cup in midweek. We're superb. We get battered at Pittodrie, and we bounce back against Celtic in the League Cup. It's stuttering in 93-94, and Rangers can't get a run of wins, but they never have 3 results like this back to back. And Smith always said, you're only 2 games away from a crisis at Rangers, or 2 defeats away. And I think it's the concentration of those 7-8 days in those 3 separate competitions. I don't think he's ever been under as much pressure in this job, in this spell, or the next. It was hellish, and as you rightly say, there were thousands waiting for this moment and thought that the tide was turning. We'll find out how much that tide really was turning, but we've done well. We've got through it. Well done, John.
No, I mean, it's a fascinating thing. I think what you have to say is we were always going to win the league, and actually I would never get rid of a Rangers manager, but you do wonder why Murray didn't pull the bullet, because you could have put any of us 3 in charge and we'd have won that league that year. This was the time to put it. But I think 9 in a row is coming into it. Because you've done 6 and 7 is guaranteed up 99.9%. And I think that's beginning to play in everybody's minds. Don't fuck up the night.
100%. And this guy will win you league titles. Andy, thank you very much.
Thanks, Martyn. John's right. Better the devil you know.
Well, indeed. But this was the biggest crisis of Smith's managerial career. How he turned it round will be the subject for next week. And yes, it does involve a Danish prince. Until then, bye for now.